they've seen the power of it on TikTok. We've seen how Instagram is now with Reels, facilitating that format, and also YouTube Shorts and all of these other kind of sub platforms. And I don't anticipate I don't know for sure, but that this will be like a switch, and TikTok is, we're done, and right at this January date. And I'm sure they're actively working on it now, but I just envision that because it's going to be kind of, I envision the platforms will be competing to win over this audience and this TikTok crowd and these influencers. And if they don't already have the systems in place to make their algorithm as smart, or I'm sure they're all working to replicate TikTok's success now anyway. And I envision that all of these brands and influencers will go there also, but TBD.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. It's just like, you don't want to, push brands or, do all this reporting about like switching platforms, because, it might just not happen. We really just don't know. I do feel like when we talk about this, I'm just really reminisce about all of the brands that had an over-reliance on Meta a few years ago. And with just one switch of the algorithm, we saw brands going under. We saw brands no longer able to reach customers, their customer acquisition costs just shooting through the roof. So as much as I feel like brands shouldn't panic and really start pulling off or anything, I do think that it is something to consider, because you really don't want to get sort of caught there with this over-reliance on TikTok. But yeah, it's definitely a complicated one.
I think it's interesting as well, because obviously the format lends itself so well to just this one platform. I don't think it will be content that they will be then like easy to transfer to like a Reels, for example. Like it might be quite tough for them to figure out what to do with, all of these resources and effort they've put into creating profiles, or, driving ads, or even being involved in like TikTok Shop. Like all of that is kind of a wasted resource if this happens and goes through.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there was also a big shift when, in like the sort of overall feeling and sentiment through the media and also through people I spoke to, when TikTok was sort of just, a content platform. And now that it's selling things, I feel like everyone's like, wait a minute. And it kind of, piqued more interest, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are seeing the same For You page as I am, but for a minute there, like it was overwhelmingly shopping focused, and everybody was trying to sell you something, and it was a big turnoff for me, and no doubt for others. And that has since simmered down. I'm not seeing every post with someone trying to sell me something, but what are you guys seeing?
Same. I think it's like, I think that there has been a pullback on there. I feel like I'm seeing more content and less shopping now as well.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more kind of content focused. I still occasionally see like a live stream of like someone kind of selling things on the fly, but most of the time it is just content, which is nicer, I think, as a kind of customer experience.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we only have 30 minutes here, so I want to pivot a bit and talk about The Body Shop. Sophia, as a brand that started in the UK, Body Shop is an icon, right? Can you sort of break down what's going on over there?
Yeah, of course. It's a really kind of interesting story as to what's happening with The Body Shop. So the Body Shop, which is kind of known for being this vegan, supernatural, very like fun brand from the 90s. I think that a lot of people have very fond memories of it here in the UK. Initially, it was opened way back when in Brighton, which is like a seaside town in the UK in 1976. And then it began kind of franchising stores, overseas stores in Brussels first. And then it even came onto the securities market. So being on the stock market in like the 80s was a big move for a cosmetics brand. And in recent times, I think it's kind of shifted a little bit away. The founder basically sold the brand to L'Oreal first, And then she unfortunately passed away a year later. And then L'Oreal ended up selling the Body Shop to Brazil's Natura & Co. for 880 million. I think initially L'Oreal bought it for a billion. Not quite sure if those numbers are correct. It says 652 million pounds. I think it's about 800 or $1 billion now. And then Natura sold it to private equity firm Aurelius for 207 million. So that's like a 600 million drop in valuation last year. And then as of this year and like 2 months ago, they basically quartered up the whole company, shut down most of the stores. I think they're completely into administration now. So even the UK stores, which were by far the most profitable, basically have shut down. I think it's a big kind of blow to people who love the brand, because obviously Body Shop was a kind of icon. It was one of the first brands to like focus on sustainability in its messaging. It was a big kind of proponent for cruelty free. I think it was one of the first brands that did that. And I think it also pioneered some things like it hired people without CVs, for example. So it was very like interested in innovative and new ways of thinking and working about running a business. But in recent years, it has been faltering. You don't really see it much on socials. They had a big retail presence, but even that wasn't particularly impactful. So I think a lot of the things that made it great, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, just became not relevant anymore, unfortunately, as the customer shifted, the age groups shifted, and I think the product assortment also shifted because there was a big issue with production moving to the Philippines. I think at that point, the company basically didn't have the best products anymore, and a lot of other brands started to, pick up on the sustainability messaging as well. So that kind of unique KPI wasn't there anymore for them.
Oh, so interesting. Do we think that it's going to somehow be saved in this restructure pulling apart?
I'm not sure. I mean, based on like information from the FT, it sounds like the IP rights for the company might be held, but I'm not sure if even the UK stores will be kept over, just because the amount of debt that the company is in is quite significant. I don't think it's possible for them to kind of get out from under, especially since the UK retail climate is not brilliant. Currently, I think not many companies are doing particularly well in retail. And obviously the impact of having a beauty brand with a significant amount of debt operating all of these stores would be quite a big kind of financial investment. So I think in 2022, it lost 71 million. And then it's been basically hemorrhaging money since then. So I think this investment arm, Aurelius, is going to basically sell it off for parts. They might end up reviving it as just a purely like e-commerce business. But I feel like what really worked with Body Shop was their kind of in-store experience, the retail component. They had, these sinks with lots of like try on, and like you could try and test the products. Like all of that stuff was something that was kind of very integral to the Body Shop experience and the way that like customers were able to feel and touch the product. I think nowadays you think like Lush would be one of those like big popular companies doing that, and I think the Body Shop just didn't have messaging which was quite as strong as what they're doing. And whereas, Lush has kind of kept up with the times, I think Body Shop has definitely faltered. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, but I think it's most likely going to be turned into e-com only, which would be a very big shame. But yeah, I think there's always a risk when you're bringing investment components into. I think when a business is sold, I think it was passed through 3 different owners for like 5 years. It's a huge amount of like work to do in a very small amount of time to try and turn the company around. So I think it's just a lot harder to do that when the company was so big. I think it had over 10,000 stores across the world. Like it's a really big brand. And I think it's harder to kind of rein that in and make it a little bit more controllable.
Such a good point. Stores are expensive. And it's another example of, I would say you can't rest on your laurels and the importance of innovating and continuing to get into the conversation and tap into pop culture. Because it's so wild to me that some company whose main focus is body care, which every brand is tapping into right now. It's such a hot spot. It reminds me of what we're talking about on the fashion side with REI and looking at why they're struggling when all things right now, it's spring, regardless, like outdoor, sports, active, all of this. And it's obviously this is an age old traditional retailer. So, but you don't often hear about them. So, anyway, we love the Body Shop. It's sad. It's nostalgic to me.
It's so nostalgic. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say that like a lot of people have very fond memories of some of the products. Like I think their mango body butter was like one of my favorite things growing up. So I feel like not having that connection to the brand anymore would be really sad. But yeah, I think that in general they've just overestimated their retail presence and they didn't cut it when it needed to be cut, especially in like areas that were underperforming. Like it should have been a little bit more leaner in that organization. So I actually don't think it's necessarily the fault of Aurelius, which, you know, currently owns the company, but it might have been some issues with it happening under Natura, not acting fast enough and not having that turnaround.
Yeah, that's such great insight, Sophia. And it's so true because it's like what you're talking about with like the lack of innovation and what Jill's saying about not really keeping up with the times. Because when I heard this, when I first read this headline, I was like, no, because it's so nostalgic and I loved the Body Shop growing up. But then at the same time, I don't use anything from the Body Shop. I can't even tell you like what their hero product is right now. I just think of the products I used in like middle school. So, you know, it's true. It's like you can't just rest on your laurels, like Jill said.
Yeah, and they've been getting into skincare a lot more. I know that they had some vitamin E products that were doing quite well. I think they were looking at tackling some aging products as well. But ultimately, I think the fact that their messaging just wasn't particularly strong. I think their marketing was lacking. And honestly, I don't think they did a bigger push across socials either. Like, I never saw it on my feed. It wasn't something that came up when I looked up other brands, which were also kind of in that cruelty-free space. A lot of the times now, I think people are like, well, maybe it's time to get away from that messaging, but I don't think that's necessarily the best idea. You know, you built up a strong brand around that. I think it could be something that you end up returning to. It's just more whether there'll be enough investment and interest to turn it around, considering how much debt it has.
Yeah, great insight here. So I want to pivot again and let's talk a little bit about the beauty counter headlines. This was another one that when I saw, I kind of went, no, because they are such a leader in the transparency and the sustainability and all of that, that big movement that we're all talking about endlessly right now. So a couple quick little notes here in case you're not familiar. So Beauty Counter founder Greg Renfrew is buying back her brand from foreclosure. She started it in 2013. The model is MLM, retail at Ulta Beauty, and DTC. In 2021, Renfrew sold a majority stake in the brand to private equity firm, the Carlyle Group, a transaction that valued the business at $1 billion. They brought in a new CEO. He didn't last very long, and then Renfrew actually returned as CEO at the beginning of this year. Now, in a statement, Beauty Counter has said that there has been a lot of different circumstances that have basically led to the brand winding down. So there were massive amount of layoffs. I heard a lot, but I don't want to say the number because I haven't verified it, but I heard there were a lot of layoffs. And what we know is that the products are still being sold at Ulta Beauty. They're still live. And if you go to the Beauty Counter site right now, it is not live. And instead there is a letter from Greg that says that the Beauty Counter business that you knew has wound down. And she says, however, I'm excited to share the news that I'm creating a new company that will allow us to sell the products you know and love, pushing forward the important mission of making the industry and our world safer and healthier. A new beauty counter is on its way. As we get the new company up and running, we're taking a short pause to build for the future and, more importantly, to serve all of you. Thank you for being a part of our community. So what will happen over at Beauty Counter? I feel like, I don't know, there's such a like big part of this part of the industry. But Jill, Tatiana, Sophia, what do you guys think? What's your take on this? Do you think that if they return, the shoppers will stay with them?
Wow. I think I do. My first thought overall is just, wow. I mean, how the tides turn so freaking fast. And it reminds me of the conversation around Farfetch, where it was the leader, the innovator, where everybody in the industry wanted to work and where everybody turned. I think of Beauty Counter as, like you said, being this innovator leader in terms of sustainability, transparency, all the things, clean, but actually clean. But God, I think that Greg is brilliant. I think you lose the founder, you lose so much. That no doubt played into it. And I mean, depending on the innovation, the assortment, they'll if they continue to bring newness to the beauty industry, to the space, as they did before, I do see potential here. What do you think, Sophia?
Yeah, for me, I think that, on the clean beauty side of things, it's quite an interesting category that's been developing quite a lot. I'm wondering if maybe the model isn't quite working for them. I'm obviously slightly less familiar with the way that cosmetics works, but they've literally had like a new launch last month of like clean fragrance. So I'm quite surprised that it's such a quick shutdown. I'm wondering if this new rebrand or refresh is going to allow them to become a bit more nimble, perhaps, in the way that they're operating. I know that with cosmetics, especially if there's a founder involved, like founders want to have a part of that, like development and growth, and be a part of that. And I think that with this, it seems like Greg had a bit of like issues back and forth, wanting to control the company, but not really being able to do that fully when there was someone else in charge. So I think that maybe she might have a better idea of what to do with it now that it's, a kind of fresh start, a clean slate.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. Tatiana, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what Sophia said in terms of being nimble and being agile. I think in the beauty landscape now, when there's so many innovative, fun indie brands, it takes a lot for older brands to really adjust and adapt to the current landscape. So if they're able, under Greg's supervision, if they're able to adjust and really find a sweet spot, I think there could be hope, because people do like nostalgia, kind of like what we talked about with the Body Shop. If there's an identifiable brand and you have some type of memory or sentiments attached to it, I do think that is a strong selling point nowadays.
That's very true. They've been popular for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's just a part of that kind of clean beauty community. I think people end up being quite loyal to those kind of brands, just because like if they trust them once, like they're probably going to trust them again with another purchase. So I think it might just be a case of coming back with the right product assortment, maybe a more engaged kind of social side of things. I think it could be, a really big opportunity for them to start again and start fresh.
So much of the buzz around this company, I mean, and maybe it was just what I was seeing because I was in all the pitches and in all the on all the news that the brand was hoping to push. But a lot of the buzz around the brand in my eyes was around their pushing for regulation around sustainability. And a lot of this is, happening, and I'm sure not to the extent that they would like to see. But do you think that, Sophia, you've written a lot, and Lexi as well, about the new regulations coming to beauty. Do you think that will have an impact on, I guess, the ability of this brand to cut through the noise or what they're known for?
Oh, that's such great perspective, Jill. I don't know if it will help them at this point. I was actually about to kind of weigh in on the opposite, saying that, they've been such an outstanding part of the industry, really pushing the goalpost further and further, lobbying Congress, helping to move regulation forward, unveiling so much of the terrible stuff that's happening within supply chains. But I was going to say that kind of work is so expensive. It's time consuming, it's expensive, it's complicated, and also it's really hard to message that kind of work. I think that, people tend to their eyes tend to gloss over a little bit when we talk about things like sustainability and lobbying Congress for better regulation on supply chains. I think people want that, but it's also really hard and it's expensive to do. So I really hope that they survive. I hope they come back stronger because, they definitely impacted the industry in a very dynamic way.
Yeah, I think that whole thing that they made with the Never list, I think was a big eye-opener in terms of how the cosmetics industry should look at skincare as well. And I think that there's more to come from that in terms of regulation. I can't imagine that following on from all of the consumer product regulation that's coming in from other places, that the US would also kind of focus on what does that look like in terms of consumer products. Like, we were already talking about PFAS and kind of forever chemicals and all of these things that are most likely going to impact the cosmetic space in a bigger way. There's so many different materials, ingredients, not materials, that are involved in cosmetics production that probably have a little bit of a checkered kind of effect that might not be quite so beneficial. And while I do think that a lot of brands have made, leaps and bounds in that category, that regulation would actually enhance all of the brands that are doing those kind of things already. So if they end up doing better with this new brand because they're following on with those principles, it might actually allow them to have some headway in that space because other brands will still be catching up.
That's a really great call out. Yeah, I mean, they already were yards and yards and yards ahead of so many brands that you're right. It's like when they come back, hopefully they'll come back stronger, or they'll come back a little bit more streamlined, and they'll come back really strong. So we're hoping that for Beauty Counter. So before we jump, we're going to go just a few minutes over here. Before we jump, I really want to talk about L'Occitane. Big beauty stories happening right now over the last month. So I'll give you guys a little bit of background in case you're not familiar, but L'Occitane basically started in 1976 in France, and they went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2010. They were the first French company to do an IPO in Hong Kong, and they raised $708 million at a $2.8 billion valuation. And the news reports from that time, Reuters said that the brand said that they were going to, quote unquote, pay off their debts by selling about a quarter of the company. So recently, starting about months and months ago, this has been big speculation in the news, but the company is planning to delist from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. They're going to go back to private. They still hold about the same amount of stocks, about 72%, and they are going to be attempting to buy back the stocks that are currently out there, a little more than 25%, for 1.7 billion euros, and that puts their new valuation at 6.4 billion. Now, it is a little bit vague as to what exactly is going on over there, but in a statement, the point was basically that the rationale is to allow the current management team, which would remain in place, to continue operations of the company's business as it is and in more long-term sustainable growth initiatives as a privately held company. They say that there has been many pressures of operating as a listed company, and that the brand needs a lot of work right now. It needs new marketing, it needs store refurbishment, it needs new IT infrastructure, and they need to attract more talent. And these things are just very, very complicated, apparently, when they're also having to deal with being a public company. So gaining investors and eventually going public are, big goals for many brands and companies. But, adding L'Occitane to this long list of stories we're talking about here the news in April really shows the sort of struggles that can ensue when taking on investors, when going public. Yeah, I have some thoughts, but curious to my colleagues here, do you guys have any thoughts on Octane?
I agree, Lexi, with you, and the notion that a lot of companies, we heard this recently. Ooh, was it Nordstrom? It was a department store company, but that really, they wanted to basically restructure. They have a lot of changes to make, and they wanted to do it basically out of this public realm. They wanted to do it, take their time, do what needs to be done, and how they want to do it without getting the backlash and the negative press and the, I guess, anyway, the slaps on the wrist about like losing money or not, maybe just losing the rapid growth that they had seen in the past. So I think when there's a time where you just want to you want to be independent. We were talking about this in the conversation at that dinner, and basically financial independence is, we talked about this in the fashion meeting today, financial independence is like a luxury. And if you can do it yourself, I think so many brands want to do it themselves. On the other note, Lexi, like you said, it's such a goal for many other brands to go public. So different ways to look at it. In my eyes, there's a lot of restructuring to be done, and they want to do it out of the public eye.
I think that's the right way to look at it. Like when you're looking at long-term growth, going public sometimes isn't necessarily the best idea. I think a lot of the times in IPO or kind of, going on the exchange ends up being a way to raise capital mainly, but not really a way to kind of look at the long-term kind of success of a company. I think in the fashion spaces, it's shown up that you'd have this big rise once the company goes public, and then it basically drops back down. So it doesn't end up kind of benefiting the company long term. While I don't think it's exactly the same space, obviously we're talking about beauty. L'Occitane owns so many interesting brands like Dr. Ranges and Sol de Janeiro. So I think it has a little bit more kind of room to play, think about different brands and what their proposition should be as they're kind of gaining market share. We've seen that at least with Sol de Janeiro, it's having a bit of a moment. So I'm wondering if the company wants to see how to drive long-term growth from that trend instead of kind of just bouncing off with an IPO, which would most likely just end up with a big rise and dip.
Mm-hmm. I feel like one theme here, I think that's a great perspective, Sophia. I feel like another theme here is, like Jill mentioned a few minutes ago, the connection of the founder, or even in the case of L'Occitane, the long-term, the person who's running it and managing it. Reynold Geiger, I'm not probably pronouncing his name right, but he was the CEO for more than 25 years, and then he stepped down in 2021. And obviously he's still super involved. He is the chairman and director of the company still, but it's interesting to kind of like maybe look a bit at how the founder plays a massive role in this, how the person who's long-term leading it plays a massive role in this, and how those shifts can really impact the company in like very real ways. But I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, I think that's a really great perspective, and hopefully they'll come back, like you guys mentioned, like we're mentioning this entire thing, but hopefully they come back even stronger, and they have so many great brands like Sophia mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I feel like there's a bit of a thread with the companies that we're covering here. Everyone's kind of focused on independence and making sure that there's, a route to expansion and profitability. And, it's a warning sign to others seeing how quickly a big empire like the Body Shop, for example, can, tumble with a few bad investment decisions. So I think that it goes to show that maybe it's the right time right now to think about, long-term growth and be very careful in terms of moving forward, thinking more about, internal expansion and building out that infrastructure rather than, growth for the sake of it.
Yeah. At the, I know we've talked about this dinner a bit, but at our Glossy Leaders Dinner in LA, which I know, Sophia, you also hosted one in London, last week as well. But yeah, at our Glossy Leaders Dinner, just at my table, there were numerous people who were talking about how frustrating it is to deal with their investors, including one person who I won't name, but she was basically like trying everything right now and using many resources and so much of her valuable time to try to buy out her one investor. And it's definitely something that I feel like brands need to really consider before just taking on money, even though, of course, that is a goal for so many.
No, I agree. And we had the same conversations in London that it's quite a tough market when you've got an investor involved, because obviously you're taking care of their profits ahead of, company growth. So I think it makes it quite a difficult environment to move and be quite nimble in that space. So I think in that respect, it can be very difficult when you're dealing with that kind of financial entity rather than focusing on just growing your business independently.
Definitely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. I feel like this was a really great talk. We covered a lot. We went a little bit over, but we had so many topics here. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. We are here every Wednesday at the same time discussing different big topics in the beauty industry. And hopefully we will see you next week. Please check out our reporting on glossy.co, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.